So energy is the currency of life. And when your body has enough energy, it does all of the maintenance tasks if you get it the right signals from the environment. But if your body doesn't have enough energy, it'll say, well, what's the least important maintenance task? And it'll stop doing that. Same thing with your car. What's the least important thing if you're really on a budget? You're probably not going to change your wiper blades because they just don't matter that much. You can still drive, except it sucks. And sometimes you might hit a tree because you couldn't see anything. So in circadian biology, when we're talking about sleep chronotypes, there's 4 of these, and they're mostly genetic, although you can reset yours if you want to. And about 60% of people, they wake up 7-ish, and they are good for the normal day, and they go to bed 10-ish, and that's kind of the default thing. And then those are called bears in Michael Bruce's work. Then the people who like to stay up late. They stay up late because when we evolved in tribes of about 150 people, you needed a night watch in case there was a predator. So these are the people who are just genetically wired, 15% of people, to stay up late and be alert, and their hormones like melatonin and cortisol and things are fundamentally different. So they're the night owls. And then there's these morning people. And those are called the bad people, because I'm not one of you. And the morning people, it's also about 15%. They wake up 4 or 5, spring out of bed. You're the 15% who should wait to have your coffee. Everyone else, you can have your coffee when you wake up, because you already are such morning people. And there's another 15% of people that are called dolphins, because they never sleep. They're the backup alarms. You know how elegant we evolved? So there's always going to be a small group of people watching out for the rest of us, whether they're the morning people taking the morning guard shift or the nighttime people taking the nighttime guard shift, and there's a backup alarm chronotype as well. So if you're here in the room this morning, it's not that early, but most people stayed up pretty late last night. So full respect for showing up. It was work for me. I was up pretty late too. And you may find me using nootropics, like microdose nicotine. That was 1 milligram, which is about 5% of what's in a cigarette. I don't smoke, never smoked, but nicotine in small doses is an anti-aging substance that is good for your brain. In high doses, it's bad for your arteries. So, isn't that interesting? So how am I on this? I'm also on modafinil, and this, like Mother Nature's other original nootropic, might be coffee. So you may see me drinking coffee. Now, this is a workshop, and I'm going to do some teaching in it, and I'll ask for some input from you, and I'm hoping more people filter in, but it may end up being a smaller workshop, which is a lot of fun, because for about 5 years, I used to teach at the University of California. I taught engineers working in Silicon Valley how to build the internet and cloud computing. So I love a small classroom session. It's very rare that I do it, which is super fun. So I want to teach you guys 6 steps to energy success. And if you read Smarter Not Harder, you'll find that there's a little bit more information in it. But I'm also going to do a lot of Q&A for you. And we'll focus first on just how to get your energy working, because that's tied in with a quest. But if you have other questions, yesterday we were lucky to have a few extra minutes for Q&A, which worked out really well. So I'm always happy for questions. And because right now the room is still pretty small, we can probably just handle it. If something doesn't make sense, you can just get my attention, and then I'll say, what are you saying? Even if we don't have a mic, I'll just repeat the question for you. Does that sound like a deal? All right. So, you remember why energy matters? The reason energy matters is that you say, no, I don't need energy, I need money. But I've been there, where I spent all of my money getting my energy back. If you're out of energy, you have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, you must get it back, and you will do everything in your power. I used to spend 20% of my income on biohacking because I was sick. And there are a lot of people who don't identify as sick, but their brains aren't working, and there's a sense of quiet desperation. So money doesn't fix the problem. say, no, time is your most precious commodity. Turns out, if you don't have any energy, you know what you do with extra time? You take a nap. And the time isn't worth anything without energy. So energy is the currency of life. And when your body has enough energy, it does all of the maintenance tasks if you get it the right signals from the environment. But if your body doesn't have enough energy, it'll say, well, what's the least important maintenance task? And it'll stop doing that. Same thing with your car. What's the least important thing if you're really on a budget? You're probably not going to change your wiper blades because they just don't matter that much. You can still drive, except it sucks. And sometimes you might hit a tree because you couldn't see anything, right? So we want you to have enough energy so that you can, at the end of the day, go, that was a great day. I handled everything that came my way, including the 3 unexpected things. And I folded every protein perfectly, and I performed my autophagy to get rid of the weak parts of my power systems, and I got rid of zombie cells, and I did all the other anti-aging things. Oh, and then I had sex for 3 hours. Like, that's what high energy looks like. But not a lot of people are there anymore, and I certainly spent a lot of my life not being there. So, to summarize the things you want to know here, let's just start. I mentioned this yesterday. Removing friction is much easier. Imagine that you had a pickup truck, and the bed of the truck is full of bags of sand, and you take it into one of those car customization places, you're like, I want a faster truck. Now, they could say, well, let's put a bigger engine in that. But what they're going to tell you first is maybe you should get that shit out of the back of your truck because it weighs so much, it's not going to be very fast. So removing the friction from your life is so much easier than trying to do stuff that's going to have you make more energy. And this isn't what we're usually taught. You're like, just work harder. Come on, you could do, pick up one more curl. That's not how it really works. So one of the biggest sources of friction in the modern world, one that our ancestors knew about very well, is called anti-nutrients. And if you've been following my work for a long time, going back to 2012, the first chapter of the Bulletproof Diet, I talked about these 5 categories of anti-nutrients. One of them was lectins, and lectins have had their day in the sun. Dr. Gundry's done a great job of talking about this. What lectins are very simple molecules. They are proteins that stick to certain kinds of sugar. Now, your body makes more than 1,000 lectins, types of lectins, every day as part of biological processes. They are not bad. But if your body makes the kind of sugars, maybe on your joints, that certain plant compounds stick to, when you eat those plants, they will fuck you up. And the person sitting next to you will eat the same plant, and they'll say, that was delicious, and I'm completely fine. Like, wow. So sometimes it's really severe, and you know it. Other times, I don't know, my back always hurts when I wake up, and I have this weird stuff on my skin, and I can't solve it. Like, well, maybe you should look at lectins, which are a part of the anti-nutrient complex, but not all lectins are bad, and you may not be sensitive to the lectins. Another, I'm going to call it an anti-nutrient right now, is omega-6 fats. These are the plant-based oils that they've been trying to sell as healthy since the invention of Crisco. Crisco was invented, not the brand name, but the substance, by Napoleon. He needed fat to feed his troops. So it's like, oh, what's the cheapest thing we can feed our soldiers? So they figured out how to hydrogenate oils, and we've been doing it ever since. But what you end up with is the idea that whether they're hydrogenated or they're just that good-for-you canola oil stuff, which is also known as rapeseed oil. Rapeseed oil isn't very good for marketing, so they renamed it to Canada oil. Canola, that's where it came from. And it was an industrial lubricant because you cannot eat this until you go through many steps of processing. And you say, okay, who cares? It's processed, but if it's an oil that's good for me, here's what happens when you eat these fats. Throughout the course of a year, we have our seasons. During the time of year where you fatten up for winter, you eat more and more polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. This is what makes bears hibernate. If you give bears butter, they won't hibernate and get fat. If you give them lots of nuts, they will hibernate and get fat. They don't tell you this, but omega-6 oils slow your metabolism. And you need some, about 1.6% of your fat if you eat grass-fed beef, and about 1.6% of your fat when you're really healthy is going to be there at various levels at different parts of the body. So when you believe that plant-based oils are somehow good for you, even though your body isn't made out of plant-based oils, what that does is that slows your metabolism. And that's one of the reasons that the French paradox isn't a paradox at all. The French paradox was, why do French people not get fat when they eat so much butter? Because the belief was that butter makes you fat. It should be called the American paradox, which is, why don't Americans eat like French people? And it wasn't the wine, it was the butter. And if you're going to eat a croissant made with canola oil or some other sort of weird oil versus one made with butter, they have a fundamentally different metabolic effect. So this is why you don't eat the salad dressing at the restaurant. This is why if it's fried at a restaurant, you just don't eat it, unless they have duck fat fries, or they cook in palm oil, or there's a new company, and one I'm really stoked about, called Zero Acre Farms that makes cultured oil. This is a fermentation-based oil that's free of omega-6s, and it lasts twice as long as canola oil in a fryer, and it costs half as much. So this is a company that will be putting millions of acres of farmland back to prairie land because we simply need less acreage to make oils that we can eat. That's something that I'm super excited about. But for you, go to a restaurant, if it's cooked in oil and you didn't tell them cook it in butter, it's probably actually not food anymore because they're going to load you up with fats that make you fat. In one of my books, this one is Not Smarter, Not Harder, I talk about omega-6 oils, and there's now studies of where oils go in the body. It's not like you eat it and it just sort of randomly smears itself throughout your body. Your white fat, if you have love handles, it is most sensitive to what you eat. So the more restaurant food you eat, the more of that goes into your white fat cells. The more white fat cells you have, the more estrogen you make. The more dysregulated your metabolism. So maybe it just makes sense to modify the ratio of oils. So if you want to remove friction from your life, eat less omega-6 oils, and that'll work really well. In the Quest, I believe we have a copy of the Bulletproof Diet and the Fasting Roadmap that shows you which oils are better, and even shows you which foods are high in lectins. Can anyone name a very high lectin food? Lentils, tomatoes? Yes. Peanuts. Peanuts are very high. Turns out grains, nuts, seeds, and the deadly nightshade family, where belladonna is from. That would include, unfortunately, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, and my favorite food on earth, peppers. My family has the genetics. We are sensitive to nightshades. Other people don't necessarily have that. In fact, my daughter didn't get that gene. So my son came home from school in first grade, "Dad, my neck really hurts. Will you rub it for me?" And it was doing this every night for a month. So I went to the school and said, "What are you doing?" "Are you feeding him potatoes?" Because he and I have that genetics. And they said, "Oh no, we fish them out of the soup before we give it to him." So I said, "Well, let's change that." And a week later, his neck pain went away and didn't come back. So my daughter happily eats potatoes all day long, and my son goes, "I don't eat those because I don't like to hurt." I had arthritis diagnosed when I was 14 because I didn't know this, and I was in constant pain all up and down my back. All my joints hurt all the time because for me, that was a major source of friction. And this is why it gets tough. We're not meat robots. We're not all wired the same. And if you come from a part of the world where your ancestors ate lentils for thousands of years, you probably tolerate them pretty well, unless one of your ancestors mated with a Norwegian, in which case you don't know. But you might want to try to either test it just by eliminating high lectin foods and then eating a bunch of them and see if you wake up the next morning going, "Oh wow, that's right, I have brain fog again. I didn't realize I felt so much better." So your job is to be curious about, how do I feel? And the easiest thing to do is go on a relatively low complexity diet that doesn't contain all of the trigger foods. And when you do that, you're like, oh, I feel really different. Or you could be one of the lucky people in the room who's like, I didn't feel any difference at all. Like, good for you. But if you don't know what the friction is and you're doing it every day, imagine you're Superman. And you're like, I've got superpowers. I can look through your clothes. I can burn holes in walls. And then Lois Lane gets the kryptonite perfume and starts wearing it. Like, I don't know. It's just like my laser's a bit dimmer today. I just must be getting old. It's just a slow decline. It's because you're getting exposed every day and you don't know it. Another massively important and underrated anti-nutrient, and I'm working hard in the world of biohacking to bring this into our awareness, is called phytic acid. Now, why would you care about that? It's because phytic acid sucks minerals out of your body. It's a plant defense compound. You have to imagine plants, they run the F words too. You guys remember the F words in order? First one's fear. What's the second one? Food, thank you. Third one? Fucking, I knew you guys would get that one. Fourth one? Friend. Fifth one? Forgiveness. All right, you guys are good students. So, plants follow the same actual rules, including forgiveness, believe it or not. So what that means is the fear part, run away from, kill, or hide from scary things. You're a plant. Running is hard when you have roots. So you can't do that, which means your strategy is kill or hide. And you hide by putting a shell around the walnut, by having heavy bark on your tree, or by killing. You know, I'll put some toxic compounds in here and those bugs won't eat me. Any mammal that eats me, if they eat too much of me, they will start to die so I can live. And if they eat a little bit of me, maybe they can get away with it. So that's how Mother Nature creates balance in the world. And it actually is very, very logical. Is anyone curious why I said plants can do forgiveness? All right, I saw a few question marks there. We all have to do some mushrooms. I'm kidding. When I wrote my book on fasting, actually, many years before I wrote my book on fasting, in 2008, I felt called to do a vision quest. So I found a shaman outside Sedona who dropped me off in a cave for 4 days with no food and no people, so I could experience loneliness and hunger at the same time and show myself that I wouldn't actually die. And she told me a story. She took me out into her corral where she kept albino camels and alpacas. Shamans are weird, by the way, if you didn't know. And she said, do you see those thorn trees? I said, yeah. She said, go look at them. There's no thorns. I said, well, how did you do that? She said, I went and I meditated with the tree and I told it was safe and it dropped all the thorns. So plants, when they feel safe, they make less toxins. They're less aggressive, the same as us, which is remarkable. Another example of that is coffee. You've probably heard of Robusta coffee beans. These are the gross ones that Folgers uses. They're a smaller bean. They're much higher in toxins because there's more insects. The more insects there are, the more aggressive plants are at making compounds that they use to hold back the world. So the more stressed a plant is, the more toxins it'll have, or in the case of some plants, the better it'll be for you. So if it's a plant that manufactures a polyphenol you use and you stress the plant a little bit, it'll make a lot more polyphenols. This is why chili peppers, if you don't water them very much, they get really hot. And if you water them a lot, they're mild because they're reacting to the environment the same way your body does, which I think is really cool. Like life always follows those 4 F words, no matter 5 F words, no matter what you do, because that's the algorithm of life itself. And it's really cool. And when you understand that, all of these steps to energy success make a huge amount of sense. Another source of friction for people that is becoming more known, especially post-COVID, is histamine-rich foods. Histamine-rich foods happen not usually because the food itself has histamine, but because when foods start to spoil, microbes take action, and microbes make histamine to keep other microbes away. So those 2-day-old leftovers that you ate, they didn't taste that good, But especially if they contained fish or pork or soy, if you eat them and you're just tired afterwards, and you're like, I need an extra cup of coffee and some sugar, it's because you got a dose of histamine, and histamine makes you tired. Or if you had COVID and had longer COVID, you're like, wow, now I have really strong symptoms and I'm super tired, maybe I'm starting to cough. That's because histamine in foods can be a trigger for some people, and if you have the right enzymes in your liver and you don't have an overactive system because of an infection, like toxic mold will do that as well, then you'd be fine on that. So one person can eat the leftovers, for the next person, they're a major source of friction. Because I grew up in a basement with toxic mold, I had toxic mold-induced brain damage, I have an overactive, it's called a mast cell system. So I know, for me, there are histamine foods like soy sauce, fermented soy, fish sauce, and leftover meat. If I eat those, I'm probably not going to feel good. In fact, if I do eat those, I take a quarter of a Benadryl and then I can eat them because I know what's going on. If I take a whole Benadryl, I just want to take a nap, right? So you can balance the amount of antihistamine you take with those foods. But if you didn't know, you're like, well, I don't know, sometimes I eat and I feel like shit. And then I eat the same thing the next day and I don't feel like shit. Like, what is going on here? What's going on here is there was an anti-nutrient from microbes trying to protect themselves, and they're basically saying, that's my cheese. And you're saying, no, that's my cheese. And then, well, it depends on the quality of your gut and your genetics. So this is why it's not the same for all of us, but your job is to be curious. Just take note. If you have sugar cravings, or you're just profoundly tired after a meal, like, oh my God, take notes. What was in the meal? How is it prepared? And all of a sudden you're gonna realize there's a pattern here. The other thing that is a real serious problem for us is glyphosate. Glyphosate is something that we spray now all over the planet. It's incredibly toxic for soil. The levels that are allowed today, 1/300th of those levels is enough to cause seizures in earthworms. So when they spray glyphosate, they're sterilizing the soil, which is completely unacceptable and actually will lead to the destruction of the planet if we allow them to continue. It's that big of a deal. Fortunately, it breaks down over time. So glyphosate does something else pretty evil. It sticks to minerals so they are not bioavailable. And what they do in the US particularly is at the end of the season when they're growing grains, especially wheat, they spray glyphosate on the crop, which kills the plant. And the plants are like, oh no, there's a sudden lack of minerals, I've been poisoned, I will put all of my energy into my babies. So it causes a surge of growth in the wheat kernels, and they can harvest it 2 weeks early. And then they feed it to you. Or they feed it to grain-fed animals that you eat. So glyphosate is something that may be affecting your gut, and if you're eating things with glyphosate in it, it is also sticking to your minerals, and your job is to get enough minerals. And speaking of minerals, I started talking about phytic acid, but I didn't tell you the full story. Phytic acid that you find in the plant-based foods, whole foods especially, oats are a great example of this, rice cakes are a great example of this, corn flakes are a great example of this. Phytic acid sucks minerals from us, but we don't really measure it or pay any attention to it. But farmers, especially ranchers, they know if they give corn and soy and grains to animals with too much phytic acid, the animals can't reproduce. The animals don't grow. They break their bones. Their hooves fall apart. So and by the way, cows with 3 stomachs, they can handle a large amount of phytic acid. We don't make the enzymes that allow you to turn this off. So when they have too much phytic acid, they add an enzyme to break it down so the cows can eat even more of the junk food for cows without breaking their bones. They don't care about you because they don't do that for us. Traditional preparation techniques for grains, like sourdough, for instance, that removes a substantial amount of phytic acid. But even soaking things overnight can help, or a little bit of sprouting. All of those are time-intensive processes, and our industrial companies don't like it. Does anyone know why cornflakes was invented? I'm guessing someone here knows. Oh my gosh. What do you think?
According to So the version of the story that I know is that cornflakes could decrease sexual drive
Yes.
in men. And so the idea is that from the, forgot the name of the...
Dr. Kellogg.
Dr. Kellogg had this idea that what was messed up about humanity was a uncontrollable sex drive. And so he came up with a product that people would have during breakfast.
Yes.
That would solve the problem by decreasing testosterone levels and make people feel less like having sexual
Exactly.
intercourse.
So Dr. Kellogg was a raging pervert. He liked forced enemas 10 times a day, and he was very opposed to masturbation. So he believed in circumcising men and women to prevent masturbation. Very few people were willing to do it to women, so he focused on men. And to this day, in the US, a lot of guys are circumcised because of what Dr. Kellogg did, because he was a fucking weirdo. Along the way, he said, oh, let's invent some foods that lower testosterone because, hey, sexual desire is the root of all evil. It's actually the root of all creation, guys. It's not the root of all evil. So he said, well, we can make cornflakes. Cornflakes are very high in phytic acid, which steals your zinc, which drops your testosterone. And they're high in a bunch of other bad stuff as well. And they just put it into marketing, using the magical power of marketing to take over your meat operating system to make you believe things that aren't true. Another one of his contemporaries was Graham. Graham crackers. These health foods are exactly the opposite of that. Fertile humans are healthy humans when they're at their ages, when they're appropriately fertile. People are losing their fertility more than ever before, and this just fundamentally false belief that plant-based foods are inherently good for you. 99% of plants on the planet will kill you or fuck you up if you eat them. I'm swearing a lot this morning. I need more nicotine. But this, by the way, is also plant-based. So I'll answer your question in a sec. So what's going on with all of this is that you got to know how it works. And we are having this incredible problem where people can't conceive. Healthy people in their 30s are just finding they can't do it. I just joined the advisory board of a company called Clockwise that's now measuring the endocrine disruptors you're exposed to. And when you stack that with a plant-based diet, bad things happen to your fertility, which means bad things happen to your creativity. That's actually the source of life. So I just want to caution you, those are anti-nutrients, and there are companies who will stare you right in the face, and they'll pay for all sorts of garbage studies, and they'll just tell you over and over and over that it's good for you because it's cheap to produce, it has a long shelf life, and they don't care about you. They care about the lowest cost food. And your job is to say, I am going to invest as much as is reasonable for me in quality foods that don't do that. So I look at cornflakes, I'm like, I can go 60 days without eating and I won't die. That's about as long as most people can go. I'm not eating that shit. I will just not eat. And because I've learned and I've taught my body carefully, I won't die if I don't eat, even though it feels like, oh my God, if I don't have lunch, I'm starving. None of that's real. So skip the stuff that's not actually food, even though it has a pretty box, and you might find massive things happen. Question here.
Thank you. That kind of just blew my mind, what you said about Dr. Kellogg's. And I had a question about cereals in general, like Cheerios and other types of cereals. Do they have the similar properties that I guess cornflakes have on your body?
Yeah, Cheerios are high in phytic acid and glyphosate. So here's the deal. No one on earth ate cereals for breakfast if they had a choice. So this is what you feed the peasants who are working your fields while you eat the bacon and eggs. This is history. This is gruel. This is literally what they would feed people even if they were slaves. This is the lowest quality, lowest cost, cheapest foods that are a source of calories because we need energy. But you want to take in energy that doesn't also steal stuff from you. So it's food free of these anti-nutrients that gives you power. But if you're starving, you can eat a lot of stuff. And over time in different cultures, because famines have been a part of our existence forever, They figured out, you know what? If you take that root and you boil it and you steam it, you leave it in the sun and you ferment it for a while, you can not die by eating that plant. Yes. And after a while, this is a sacred food for us because it's the thing that keeps us alive when we're going to die. But that doesn't mean it's good for you. And when, in all societies historically, when there is availability of high-quality fats, they get prioritized. When indigenous people in America would kill a buffalo, they would eat all of it, but the two most important parts were the fatty hump on the back and the liver. The liver goes to the kids and the pregnant women first, for a reason. They did not give them corn as their primary thing because it's a superfood. It's not a superfood, and they knew it. And there are people trying to trick you into believing this. It just doesn't work. By the way, I was a devout vegan and then a raw vegan for a while, so I went down that path because I didn't understand this stuff, and I had to repair my biology after I did it. So I just want you guys to understand this is a source of friction in your life. If you're eating a bunch of foods that you think are healthy, but they're actually taking your minerals, you need minerals to make ATP. You need minerals for bone density. You need minerals to make your hormones. You need minerals for almost every enzyme in your body. And it's shocking what happens when you bring your mineral levels up. And back to glyphosate. How do you get rid of glyphosate in your body? Anybody know? There's this thing called humic and fulvic acid. I think it might be in Danger Coffee. There are some studies that show it helps to pull it out of the human body. Eating a diet higher in animal protein, and specifically the amino acid glycine that is found in collagen, is also a way to push glyphosate out of your body because the gly in glyphosate sticks to the gly in glycine when you're forming collagen. So you have 2 plates of food. They look pretty similar. One of them is relatively high in anti-nutrients. The other one isn't. They both taste good. If you know, I'll choose the one that tastes good and is good for me. So this is a major part of biohacking. It is the easiest thing to do versus doing things that make you stronger. Just stop things that make you weak. All right, let's move on to our next one. Getting raw materials. To do this, you got to look at what your body's made out of. So I hate to tell you this, you don't have a body. You think you do, but the body that you will leave this room with is fundamentally different than the body you came here with. Because right now your metabolism is working, it's taking some of the stuff you ate and it's replacing cells. And you're actually shedding some cells, other ones you'll be excreting later. So we don't see it this way because you're like, I have a body. Your body is more like a whirlpool in matter than actually something that exists. Because all the cells in your body will be replaced over 7 years. So you're just an exceptionally slow whirlpool. And that means that if you're taking things in and things are going out, if you don't take the things in that are required for you to show up at your full performance, at your full energy levels, over time, you get weak. So I don't know anyone who is made out of kale or sugar or even carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are useful and something you probably want to eat unless you have epilepsy. You can go without carbs for a while if you want to lose weight or for a specific thing, but if you do it for a long period of time, you will hate your life because we're less than 1% carbohydrate. We are actually an equivalent percent of minerals, but we're made out of protein and fat and water. So if you're saying, all right, I'm going to do a solid for the earth because you've been misled, what you find is you're eating a whole bunch of these plant-based proteins that don't have a lot in common with your proteins. And you don't have the right raw materials because your amino acid ratios are off, and something else happens that's magical. You guys have probably heard of collagen protein, right? So I made collagen into a $1 billion industry category. And collagen's important because it's not just a collection of amino acids, the building blocks of protein. When you eat proteins, proteins act as signals into your body. Things called peptides that are present. The reason you feel good when you put collagen in your coffee is that there are signaling molecules called di and tripeptides that actually talk to your body. They're one of the ways of getting a signal into your operating system. So it's fascinating how all this works, but when someone says, I have this very highly processed product, like brown rice protein, it was cheap, but it doesn't do the same thing. In fact, you need to eat twice as much of that as you do animal protein to get the protein equivalents into your body. So imagine that you were one of those, well, we're in Colombia, I can say this. There was a time when people would take 2 condoms full of cocaine, double bagged, and then swallow a whole bunch of them and then fly to the US, right? Well, they ate the cocaine. Why did they die? Because it wasn't bioavailable. Plants do the same thing to their proteins so that you can't use them because they don't want you to use them. Those proteins are in the plants either for defense or for reproduction, but plants are not primarily protein-based. So when we're like, we're gonna go get all these proteins, it's because someone somewhere said, you gotta get enough protein. There's 2 kinds of protein I'd like to tell you about. The first one is called sarin, the nerve gas. It's been used in terrorist attacks. It comes from beans. So it's a plant-based protein. So using vegan logic, therefore all plant-based proteins will kill you, right? I mean, it's just logical. Or there's spider venom. If you eat that, it's probably not going to be very good for you. So therefore all animal-based proteins will kill you. Or what if different proteins did different things in your body? Well, they do. So you want proteins that your body can absorb and make full use of, and that contain larger amounts of minerals and that don't contain things that block your minerals. And you can be vegetarian and do this because you have access to cheese, and you have access to eggs, and you have access to butter, and actually yogurt and stuff like that, assuming you're not sensitive to it. So that's why you can have countries that are primarily vegetarian and they do fine because they're getting their saturated fats and they're getting animal-based proteins, they're just not eating the animals. So I would encourage you, if you're on a 100% plant-based diet for some reason, to at least add ghee back into it because your life will change and you'll be able to better absorb the polyphenols that are in it. So your raw materials, protein, high-quality absorbable protein, including collagen protein, is absolutely necessary. The anti-aging studies that I've cited, there's a case for doing 0.6 grams of high-quality animal protein per pound of body weight. That's probably not enough, but there are some studies that show that that can work. The predominant belief here is about 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body weight. So when I weighed 300 pounds and I wanted to weigh 200, I would have needed 200 grams of protein a day. If you know you had 30 grams of protein this morning, raise your hand. Okay, a few people. If you ate protein but you have no idea how much, raise your hand. Okay, good deal. You probably ate 10 grams of protein, maybe 12. So if you find yourself always hungry, you find yourself not putting on muscle, getting fat, an easy thing to do is to increase protein and actually just pay attention for a day. Just say, it turns out I only ate 60 grams of protein. You can easily absorb 30 grams per meal. And if it's high quality protein, you can actually do 50 grams a meal if you need to. I do about 50 grams a meal, but I'm not a small person, so I need a little bit more protein than a 4 foot tall woman would, for instance. But you still need the protein because protein also builds bones. So getting those raw materials, if you have that and then you pick up something heavy, you'll grow muscle. If you don't have that, you pick up something heavy, you'll produce stress hormones because your body couldn't respond to the signal to improve that you put into it. The other 2 just preeminent but boring things are vitamin Dake. That's vitamindake.com, D-A-K-E. I talked about those yesterday. This is vitamin D3, which comes from animals. There's vitamin A. There are lots of people who say, well, just take your plant-based vitamin A, it's beta-carotene. Your body can't convert beta-carotene efficiently into retinol, which is a proper form of vitamin A. When people get into vitamin A, they don't get macular degeneration. Their eyes work better, and many, many systems in the body work better. Vitamin K is missing from plant-based foods unless you like natto. Who's tried natto? 1, 2 people. Did you like it? No. So natto is a traditional Japanese, Ken, you've had natto, like you probably like it. You can't eat it? Okay, good deal. So natto is a traditional Japanese food, and I got to give it to the Japanese. Like their selections of seaweed, very high minerals, and when they eat small amounts of soy, traditionally it's always fermented heavily to get rid of all the bad stuff in soy. Natto is fermented until it looks like mucus, and it tastes like mucus with a little bit of peanut butter in it. But it does contain vitamin K2, but you get it mostly from dairy, or you can get it in a pill, and you won't get very much from industrial dairy, but you'll get it from grass-fed dairy, especially if it's cultured butter. But if it's mechanically separated butter, you don't get very much of it, which is why you get the Kerrygold, you get the butter from New Zealand, and magically it's more yellow because it has more nutrients, but it just tastes different. Your body likes it somehow. That's your meat operating system going, I got myself some K2, I love this, and it just tastes good. And it's not just the flavor, it's the nutrient sensors in your body that are invisible to you. That's why you drink Danger coffee. It's like, I don't know, it tastes like really good coffee, but there's something else. That's your nutrient sensors going, minerals, thank God I needed minerals. Right, so vitamin Dake drives minerals into the body. So if you go to the vitamindake.com website, and you pick up Minerals 101, or you're maybe already taking a multi-mineral, there are multiple companies who make those, and you get that combination of things, everything you do will work better. So if you want to have your energy working, well, what you would do is you would make sure you have these first. Before you take the sexy nootropics, before you take the stuff that enhances libido or whatever supplement you're into, you just start with the basics, because we know they're missing from our food. The next thing is fiber. Like, Dave, I thought you hated plants. I don't hate plants, they hate us. It's totally different. See, they told me not to laugh at my own jokes, but I just make myself laugh all the time, so you guys just have to deal with it. All right. So when you get enough fiber without anti-nutrients, what you're gonna find is it changes the microbes in your gut. And you need healthy bacteria in your gut. And you can take probiotics. I love probiotics, but if they don't have anything to eat, it won't work. And one of the best sources is something called acacia gum, because you're looking for fiber without plant poisons in it. So you'll find these people go, well, I'm from the 70s. And we learned if you eat whole wheat, because fiber. Let's ignore all the other stuff that's in whole wheat that's sucking minerals out of your body. Or I'm gonna eat brown rice because of fiber. Let's ignore the 80 times higher arsenic levels in brown rice versus white rice. There's a very good reason that countries where rice is a traditional food, if you were not the poorest of the poor, you would eat polished rice. And if you were a peasant and you had no choice, you would eat brown rice. They know it's hard on the gut, but literally, because fiber, it's the same thing. You guys seen Idiocracy, the movie? Only a couple. All right, if not, this is your homework. You need to watch Idiocracy. I predicted the future really, really well. And this is about the world's dumbest man who gets frozen cryonically and wakes up 200 years later when he's the world's smartest man. And the world is starving to death because they're spraying Gatorade on the crops because electrolytes. We're doing that right now because fiber. The presence of fiber doesn't cancel out the fact that there could be cyanide in it. But the thinking is, well, if that's fiber, it's good for me. No, there's no evidence for that. So if you are from a part of the world where your ancestors ate beans and legumes, you probably tolerate them well, but you probably don't cook them right. Because your grandmother's like, you gotta soak them for 2 days, or you have to pressure cook them. Even something like quinoa, which is indigenous to Peru. Hippies are buying so much quinoa that locals are starving because they can't get access to their foods. But when they cook it, they ferment it for several days. If you eat quinoa, it needs to be pressure cooked or it's not actually safe to eat. And even then, quinoa and flax seeds and things like that, they have high levels of phytoestrogens. Remember yesterday? We have a 50% drop in testosterone across our species. Maybe eating more plant estrogens because fiber is a stupid idea. I'm not saying you can't eat any of those foods. I'm just saying eat less of them. And if you do well on beans and legumes, then cook them very well. But there are tons of people, no matter what you do to them, they're not going to work well for you. And people say, but I can get all the protein I need from my beans and rice. It's a complete protein. Yeah, you're going to get 500 grams of carbs to get enough protein. That doesn't work very well. I don't want you to be protein deficient. I don't want you to have too much protein either. But I'd rather you have a little too much than not have enough. And then people say, what about eating the rainbow? Okay. Do you think our ancestors throughout most of the year had a rainbow of foods to select from? They flew kumquats in from Florida. No, they didn't do any of that stuff. So how is it that that's what we have to do, but our ancestors didn't do it? They were surviving on potatoes and cabbage all winter long with a few hunks of pork if they were lucky, depending on what part of the world you're from, right? If your ancestors are Hawaiian, the rules are different, right? From a tropical part of the world, right? But this is actually how it works. And it's fascinating to me because what we're really needing from these plants is polyphenols. And we're going to go back in time a little bit. When we were first establishing trade routes across the continents, do you know what the first thing we carried was? You want to guess? Salt. We used to pay people in salt. The salt we used back then had all of the minerals that you needed. It was rock salt, it was sea salt, and it was so precious that people would die trying to transport it over the Himalayas. Wow. And right after that, those trade routes were for herbs and spices, and tea, and coffee. Why is that? Because we need polyphenols. They are thousands of times more dense in oregano and rosemary and thyme and cumin and all of the traditional herbs. Those are Mother Nature's multivitamins. And we've used those medicinally, and we've used them for culinary reasons because they're very high in plant-based compounds that are good for us. But they're low in all the other stuff that's bad for us because you only need a tablespoon of oregano, and you get massive benefits from doing that. So if you're worried about getting enough plants, you actually should be worried about getting enough polyphenols, the colored compounds in plants. So literally 4x the number of herbs you put on your food when you cook. It'll taste better, and you'll get huge health benefits. And then if you just didn't have the salad, you'll be okay. And you can eat the salad too. It's good for you, unless it has parasites on it. By the way, 90% of parasite infections come from eating raw vegetables, not meat. But it's almost like PETA doesn't want you to know that. Do you guys know what PETA stands for? I think it's People for the Eating of Tasty Animals, but I've been trolling them for 20 plus years. I love PETA. They're one of my most fun toys. All right. We already talked about healthy fats as raw materials. I'll just say your brain is 45% saturated fat. Your body doesn't make a lot of fats on its own, but one fat that it will make is palmitic acid, which is a saturated fat. Mother's milk is more than 50% saturated fat, yet we go around saying, it's bad for you. It's not bad for you. How many times have you had a family member say, you can't eat that because cholesterol, right? Well, the American Heart Association, this is a great story, we have time for it. I was at a very exclusive mansion in Malibu overlooking the water, and there's about 50 people in the room. Peter Gruber's there, like Hollywood elite are there. And I go in and I talk to a lady, she goes, I'm curious what you have to say. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be good. So, just real respectful. And I gave a talk, and I talked about saturated fat, and I talked about thyroid, and I talked about all these things. And at the end of it, the lady stands up, she said, I'm the president of the American Heart Association. And I'm like, and by the way, 2 days before, I was talking with Nina Turwich about a class action lawsuit against the AHA to stop the nonsense they were doing. And she stands up and she looks at all these people and she said, everything you said is right. We figured out 5 years ago that eating cholesterol doesn't do anything bad to you, but no one will listen. Eat your eggs. It's okay unless you're allergic. Okay? Like that's how it works. Like this is humans. This is us. Now, what I want you to do after we do these first two steps of energy success is pick a target area. When you do the quest, when you read the book, what you're going to find is there's 5 areas that people are really interested in. And I know this because when I opened the world's first biohacking facility underneath Arnold Schwarzenegger's office in Santa Monica, I brought in all the gear that I used to hack myself and said, well, let's make this accessible to the public. I started looking at what are people actually asking for. And there's 5 big buckets. One of them is, I want more muscle. One of them is, I want my energy back, and I want less fat too. Because usually when you have extra fat, you have less energy, because the energy that should have gone to your brain or your muscles went to muffin top. Another one is I want my brain to work better. I just want my brain back. I'm forgetting words. I can't focus. Another one is I want stress management. I want resilience. I just feel like I'm anxious all the time. I can't handle it. For the first time since we've measured this, people are now asking for stress handling abilities more than weight loss. Even though we have more obese people than ever before, people are so stressed, like, take care of my stress and I'll deal with my fat. Okay, that's not a good place to be in, but this is actually where we put our society. So they're asking for that, and they're asking sometimes for additional cardiovascular. So I don't like getting tired when I walk up the stairs. I'm too tired to play with my grandkids, stuff like that. So you got to pick a goal. And if you say, I want to be healthy, okay, so I'll ask you this. When you woke up this morning, if one of the first 3 thoughts in your mind was, I want to be healthy today, raise your hand. Are you really sick? There you go. So, thank you, I've been there. Unless you're really sick, you will not ask for health because you just want your health back and you would do anything to get it, right? And you're working on it, you're in the right place. How many people said, today, I want to be optimized? Nobody. Oh, 2 people. So here's the thing about optimizing. I don't want to optimize. I want to have my cake and eat it too. I don't want to trade off something for something else. I want both, and we can do this with biohacking, right? I want all those 5 things, but you got to pick the first one. And whichever one you pick, it'll pay dividends in the other categories. But you focus in one area. And that's really, really important. So when you get that target area and you start tracking it, there's 6 spheres that are in the quest that you'll learn about. And you just focus on that and maybe pick a secondary goal. And then you choose what you're going to do that's going to get that working for you the most. And it's in the challenge, or it's in the quest, and it's in the book, just to tell you how to do that. Just pick one. And some people also say, I want better sleep, or I want my libido back. If you deal with these 6 spheres in the quest, those will happen automatically. And if not, in the book, there's a couple extra sections on those things. But those aren't primary goals for most people. And then the 4th thing you want to do is send the right signals. So if your goal is this, and you're sending a signal for this, and you don't get results, who would have ever thought? And here's a prime example. I want to build muscle, but I also want to have cardiovascular capacity, so I'm going to run 5 miles a day, and I'm going to lift weights. There's a name for that. You know what it is? Overtraining. So if you want cardiovascular stuff, you should do what I talked about yesterday, which is going to take you 15 minutes a week, and then you can go lift some weights if you want to. But if you're going to grind out the miles because it feels good, because you meditate on a treadmill or something like that, well, I support your right to do stuff that makes you happy. I also question whether you're going to like your hips and your knees when you're 60, because very, very few people can keep that up. And if that's how you manage your biology, and then you can't do it anymore, you're going to have an uncomfortable transition period. And if instead you conserved your joints by getting your cardio in ways that were more effective, you're much more likely to be 100 years old and walking around and cooking your own eggs. So that's how I look at it there. But if you wanted muscles and you're running, you're probably not going to get it, because doing a ton of cardio teaches your heart and your body to do one thing, and doing a ton of weight training teaches it to do another. So you pick a goal that's first, and I would suggest you probably need enough muscle mass first, because that's very potently anti-aging. You don't want to be a balloon animal. By the way, bodybuilders are some of the best biohackers out there, but if you carry way too much muscle mass, that's not good for you either, from a cardiovascular or a cancer perspective. So you want to be what the New York Times called me, almost muscular. I'm like, winning. And the thing that's the biggest trick that you're going to learn when you do the quest, and you'll learn when you read the book, is missing. It's recovery. That's our next one. So to recover, the exercise is the signal, but the signal that you should transform comes from quickly returning to baseline. So when you do the AI bike at Upgrade Labs, you do a 20-second sprint, and then you do breathing exercises to calm your nervous system afterwards. So when your body says, there was a potential threat, that's why you must have been running, or maybe why you were picking up heavy stuff, now I'm safe, now I have enough nutrients. Oh, it's so easy to add those nutrients back in to build more capacity. But if you send a signal that says, I'm not safe because you overtrained, even if you have enough nutrients, the body says, I'll use those nutrients to be ready for the next threat. And it won't be adaptive, putting on muscle, getting healthier. It'll be stress hormones. It'll be disturbed sleep. And so your goal is signal, nutrients, recovery, and safety. And you can do this right after a workout. You can do deep breathing exercises to just calm down. And it's not like this is even necessarily new. I interviewed Frank Zane, one of the most legendary bodybuilders ever, on my podcast a while ago. He's in his 70s now. And it's like, Dave, the whole time I worked out, I was doing breath work. I was meditating every day. I play the flute to relax. Like this big bodybuilder guy, it was like talking to a monk, because he learned to have the physique he wanted. He had to recover, and he had to have the calmness. He had to be able to do that. And you can learn to turn on that signal of safety all the time. You can learn to turn it on after a workout. Or if you let your meat operating system be in charge, it'll be stressed and jangled and doing all sorts of stuff that isn't in your best interests. So this is why a mindfulness practice, this is why almost any of the quests that you do in Mindvalley are going to benefit you, because you're going to learn how to do that, which is, the world's a safe place, there is abundance, therefore I can be young and strong for a very long period of time. If the world is not a safe place, or there is not abundance because you didn't learn how to eat, then you don't get the results you want. And then you're frustrated. And what do? You work even harder. And it's not how to do it. And the next thing you want to do is the hard part. It's evaluate. So up here, we talked about picking a target and tracking it. The evaluation stage is when you say, all right, how did I do? So I've been tracking it. Are my numbers going up? Are they going down? Am I happier? Am I more calm? Am I achieving whatever that goal is? And if you're not, your meat operating system is going to tell you, oh, don't pay attention to that. It's going to tell you, you're doing fine. I like what you're doing. Eat more Cheetos. Well, when you use raw numbers like that, you can see whether you're going up or down. Sometimes having an accountability partner, having a community around you, having friends you can talk to about this because they're also biohacking, this is really important. And it's one of the reasons the biohacking conference in June is coming on in Orlando, because almost 3,000 people there who are all doing this. Like, oh, what happened to your HRV score when you tried Ozempic? What happened when you did this? And we all share. But because you can become data-driven, it's not just about how you feel. How you feel is important, but your body will lie to you about how you feel. One of the things it'll do, you stand up in the morning, and here, there's Netflix, donuts, and a couch. And here, there's an exercise bike or a gym. Now, the rational part of you is like, totally, I should go exercise. But if you feel it, the body's like, man, that's the sexiest couch. Like, wouldn't it just be nice? And this looks so attractive. It feels attractive. And this looks really bad, right? You know one thing up here, but it doesn't match what your body's telling you, right? And this is why evaluation is important. Because when you can evaluate with numbers, you can say it doesn't work. I did an experiment. This is going back about 10 years. And you're going to have to stick with me for a second, because you're like, why is he talking about this? And yes, this is a TMI kind of discussion. And plug your ears. So there's an old Taoist equation. So I'm into longevity, and ancient practices are interesting. Taoists were actually interested in living forever. So what they said is, they said for men, there's an equation for how frequently you should ejaculate if you want to live forever. You guys know the equation? Age in years minus 7 divided by 4. So if you were 49 or something, then you would subtract 7, which is about 42, and then divide by 4, whatever that number is. That you ejaculate only like that number of days, once every whatever that number of days is. And I'm like, this sounds like complete bullshit. I'm going to prove those guys wrong. So for a year, I tracked my ejaculation frequency, my sex frequency, because it turns out it is possible to have sex without ejaculating. It was very difficult. And the daily happiness score. Before I go to bed, like, how much do I like my life? Scale of 1 to 10. Like, goes today, do I like what I'm doing with my companies? Do I like my family life? Do I like my friends? And I'll be damned, there is an ejaculation hangover. So when men ejaculate, what happens is our testosterone drops precipitously for the next 24 hours. And so what the Taoists were teaching was that for men, orgasms, if they're accompanying ejaculation, they're depleting. They say you walk away diminished. But for women, you walk away undiminished. So isn't that interesting? So if women need to have orgasms because their emotional intelligence is higher, and it's proven health benefits. That's why you hear Emily talking about sex magic, like it's finally coming into the world of biohacking. See what I did there? That was a dad joke. One of you got it. So I published my data in one of my books for a whole year, but the Taoist said if you really want to live forever, just ejaculate once every 30 days and keep the length of your orgasm to under an hour. And I'm like, what the absolute fuck? Like, I did this for a year. And I will tell you that they're right. It really does diminish men to ejaculate all the time. That's why porn is so toxic. But they never published an equation for women. Because, I don't know, I guess only men wanted to live forever back then. So I came up with the equation for women. And it was based on a lot of science. You guys ready for it? Okay. It's the number of orgasms until you feel like you're going to die, plus 2. But that's why you evaluate. Daily happiness was easy to do. All right, let's do some Q&A. And by the way, yes, men can have hour-long orgasms. It's painful, your abs hurt. I don't know if you want to try that. I got a question over here. I'll repeat it. The question was, I got addicted to Bulletproof collagen bars. They're amazing. And now they're off the market. What's going on? The answer is, I don't know. They kicked me off the board. So I have a major stake in Bulletproof, but I have no visibility into what they're doing. So I still use their inner fuel, their prebiotic. I use Bulletproof collagen, brain octane oil. But I don't have control over what they make or don't make, and I am not responsible for the spinach kale smoothie that they make. I have a question here.
So if you could only have 3 foods and 3 supplements, what would you pick?
3 foods and 3 supplements. Definitely for supplements, it'd be vitamin Dake, and it'd be Minerals 101. What would the third supplement be? It would probably be a methylated B vitamin, multivitamin kind of a supplement. But I almost want to say aniracetam, which is my favorite nootropic, which is one that when I take it, this is the only nootropic that increases memory I/O. If you're wondering why I can remember all this stuff, it's because I have weird mental structures that let me do that. But it's also because I take a cognitive enhancer that increases bandwidth to get things in and out of my memory. You have to read the book. I'm kidding. It's aniracetam, ANIRACETAM. I've been on that stuff for 25 years. It's the only one of that family that's also stress reducing, but it just has also brain preservation powers. I've been on it for 20 plus years. Oh, you know what? I'm going to change my supplement thing. Just give me powdered liver, because that's all B vitamins and some other stuff. And I hate eating liver, so I don't really want that to be one of my foods, but it would have to be if I only had 3 foods. It would definitely be ribeye. Probably raw honey, just because you need a source of carbs, and that's one that doesn't leave a lot of residue. What would my third food, if I can only have 3? Probably ikura nigiri. That's salmon egg sushi, because salmon eggs are the most nutrient-dense thing after liver you'll get. In fact, indigenous tribes would dry salmon eggs, even in times of war between tribes. They would trade dried salmon eggs from coastal people with inland people to give to the pregnant women because it made for healthier babies. And they're like, yeah, we're fighting now, but 7 generations from now we'll probably be screwing each other, so here, have some fish eggs. So there's that. Cool question. All right, I see you in the red over here. Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go.
Is there ever a time that we should be eating fruit or fruit juice? And if so, what fruits and in what form?
Is there ever a time for fruit or fruit juice? Yeah. Eat fruit for dessert after a meal so you don't get a blood sugar spike. If you eat a lot of fruit, it will raise your triglycerides. That's what fructose does, even if it comes in natural, natural fruit. So you can have some fruit. I eat fruit. There's nothing wrong with it. Some fruits are way more higher glycemic than others, like bananas tend to do that, but you may do well on them. So fruit after fat and protein is okay. I don't recommend fruit in the morning because it's going to set you up for blood sugar spikes all day long. But generally people do better when they have fruit after dinner or after lunch at the end of the meal. And in terms of fruit juice, if you have food poisoning or you have really severe hypoglycemia, orange juice surprisingly works really well. Like, what? Orange juice for food poisoning? It's because when you have bad bacteria in your gut making something called lipopolysaccharides, this is the bacterial toxin, an endotoxin. When they get orange juice, they stop making toxins because they like the sugar. So you could take activated charcoal and orange juice and you'd do better off. But otherwise, why would you juice a fruit when you could just eat it? So there's that. All right, we have mic passers, so there you go. Okay, cool.
Hey, Dave. Thank you for everything. Just talking for all the men, that stop listening after you can come once a month. That doesn't count if you don't ejaculate, right? If you learn how to do that, it doesn't count, right?
The question is, if you learn how to not ejaculate, but you're retaining your semen, yeah, that doesn't count. That's what Taoists are telling you to do. So what I found in that experiment was the less frequently I ejaculated, the more often I had sex. Because you're like horny all the time, like, can we go again? Like, hey, how about tomorrow, right? And since we've already shown, and there really are medical studies about this, that orgasms are beneficial health-wise for women, and it's up to you to decide how many and how often, but generally speaking, if you're in a relationship with someone and you're like always ready, you're much more likely to do something that's really pleasurable for both of you. And you can learn to have like whole body orgasms for hours as a man. And when that happens, it's pretty intense.
Have you made any experiments on using that for sexual transmutation?
Yeah. In fact, I wrote about this in, I think Game Changers was the book. So sexual transmutation is really a form of sex magic. Emily's talking about this as well. And there are certain non-ordinary states of reality we can enter. Sometimes people use plant medicine. I talked about it yesterday, breath work, all these things. One of those is sacred sexuality. And when you get into these really highly, almost like you're tripping states, which can happen, if you put an intention into that, that can actually make things happen. And the energy that you don't expend goes back into your body. And when I first started teaching this about 2014, I had a bunch of guys come up to me. And I say guys in particular because this doesn't work for women. If women do that, I'm not going to have orgasms, it's depleting. That's not necessarily where you want to be unless you're choosing that for a specific reason. So the kind of things I would hear was, I didn't ejaculate for 30 days and I started 2 companies. I didn't ejaculate for 30 days and I got a raise and a promotion and I love my life. And I'm that way now. Quite often when I have sex, I'm not going to ejaculate, but let's go as long as you want, because you can learn control over that. It's an act of, in fact, John Gray teaches it best, the Mars and Venus guy. And we have time for this. So the trick is that right before you're going to ejaculate, you tighten your butthole. So you have to learn how to relax your butt. And when you do that, you can not ejaculate. So there you go. TMI conversations all over the place. All right.
I've been hearing some concerns about Himalayan salt, one being that the pink color is actually from tin, and then the other thing, which I don't know if it's true or not, I've heard that, and then the other thing that there's micro traces of explosives because that's how they're mining it. I actually had a friend who got salt confiscated at TSA going through because they had the trace of explosives and they took it from her.
Interesting. It turns out there are different qualities of Himalayan salt. The best quality Himalayan salt is mined by hand, and it's ground with wooden grinders or stone grinders, and that's perfectly clean. And the Himalayan salt that comes from Pakistan, that's exploded, and oftentimes it's ground on things that contain brass, which has toxic metals in it, like tin, you'll find comes from that. So this is a processing issue. So the 18 pounds of Himalayan salt for $6 is probably not how to do it. Another company is Redmond Sea Salt in Utah, which is pretty clean. So actually my time's up anyway. So there you go. The quality of salt matters. It's a real issue. Okay. On that note, we got one more. All right.
Yeah. So I think it's an important question. It's for the men, but on behalf of the ladies, or also the men who like men. So for those times when the guy does ejaculate, what is the biohack for him to be ready again faster? And maybe like again after that?
Oh man, that's, okay. Having adequate testosterone helps a lot, which is a function of what you eat. Having adequate blood flow helps a lot as well. And there are nitric oxide supplements like N101.com is the best that I've found.
Write that down.
So it's just the letter N, one, and then the letter O, then 1.com. And the guy who created that has a machine that tests for nitric oxide. The beet supplement you're taking now probably doesn't work. And I just did a big podcast about the chemistry of nitric oxide. And it turns out they're using depleted beets that cannot raise your nitric oxide. So if you're not really noticing like, wow, I got veins a half hour after you take it, it's not working. Arginine doesn't work for most people, for instance. So that would be one thing. The other thing is a little bit more esoteric, spiritual, but the interaction of the woman and the man is a really big thing. So, I mean, there's techniques, without getting too juicy here, but you keep them inside you. You have to worship the cock, and it'll wake back up.
Oh, worship.
Worship.
Okay.
That's your job, young lady. All right, never ended a talk on that. Guys, thank you.